chapter 11.
I hope you will put up with me in a little foolishness. Yes, please put up with me. I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy. I promise you one husband to Christ, so that I might present you as a pure virgin to him. But I'm afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ. For if someone comes to you and preaches a Jesus other than the Jesus we preach, or if you receive a different spirit from the spirit you received, or a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it easily enough. He continues in verse 5, I do not think I am the least inferior to those super apostles. So who are the super apostles? Some people say false apostles. The definition of apostle is one who is sent by God in this regard. And while Paul was not one of those originals, he had an encounter with Christ on the road to Damascus, and he got his commission then, and he therefore says on that basis he is among the apostles. But there are people who are saying that Paul is not really an apostle. And it hurts. It's kind of like someone looking at you and telling you don't belong to something that you really belong to. And you're thinking, you don't have the right to say that to me. So that's where he's at. And he's the one who is evangelizing. He is the reason that the church, well, Christ is the reason, but he is the apostle that Christ used to establish the church in Corinth and many other places. Who else could it be? I would say Apollos was one of the individuals that was being followed. Apollos was eloquent, and the Greeks loved eloquence. Paul was not eloquent. It is said that Paul was high, and he was not attractive to look at, and he was not eloquent of speech. Imagine having Apollos, who might have all of the opposite characteristics, and eloquence, etc., and people are attracted to the eloquent. Paul at one stage says, we are fighting over foolishness here. Paul plants, Apollos waters, but God gives the increase, so let's not be divided over these things. But in this particular case, the church is divided, and there are people who are against Paul. I don't have to call all the groups names. You probably are familiar with some of them. But you have opposition. I think we get our understanding of what opposition is. And when you felt that you've invested heavily in something, and somebody else is going to, and I'll use a worldly example, take the credit. It hurts. Things that you have built up, and other people get the credit for its existence or its growth. And you figure, well, what about me? Am I chopped liver? And so that's how Paul is reacting here. I'll continue to read. I may, in verse 6 of chapter 11, I may indeed be untrained as a speaker, but I do have knowledge. In other words, others who were eloquent were getting the attention, and he doesn't have that eloquence. I do not think I'm at the least inferior to those super apostles. I may indeed be untrained as a speaker, but I do have knowledge. We have made this perfectly clear to you in every way. Was it a sin for me to lower myself in order to elevate you by preaching the gospel of God to you free of charge? I robbed other churches by receiving support from them, so to serve you. And when I was with you and needed something, I was not a burden to anyone, for the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied what I needed. I have kept myself from being a burden to you in any way, and will continue to do so. So you see the problem. Paul is the one who came and cut down the trees and cleared the land and established the church in Corinth. Others are coming along and they're getting the glory, and they're saying that Paul is a nobody. He's hurting. What does he say here? I never even asked you for a penny. When he went to Corinth, he went back to making tents to support his ministry. A tent maker, that was his profession. And when the others came down from Macedonia, they took care of him, and he could preach all the time, full time, and not have to worry about making a living. He said, the Macedonians took care of me while I was here in Corinth. I didn't ask you for anything. And you should take care, don't muzzle the mouth of the ox when it treads out the wheat or the corn or whatever the case may be. I didn't ask you for anything. And the Macedonians were poor, remember. So the Macedonians were giving out of their poverty, and they were taking care of Paul. Verse 10. As surely as the truth of Christ is in me, Nobody in the regions of Achaia, which is where Corinth is, will stop this boasting of mine. Why? Because I do not love you? God knows I do. And I will keep on doing what I'm doing in order to cut the ground from under those who want an opportunity to be considered equal with us in the things they boast about. For such people are false apostles, deceitful workers, masquerading as apostles of Christ. So these are really false apostles. No wonder, he says, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. Isn't that the truth? It is not surprising then that if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness, their end will be what their actions deserve. Continue at verse 16. Let no one take me for a fool, but if you do, then tolerate me just as you would a fool, so that I may do a little boasting. So he doesn't want to boast, but the old Paul is going to manifest itself. Okay, let me tell you who I am. Let me show you my resume. In case you don't think highly of me, here's who I am. In this self-confident boasting, verse 17, in this self-confident boasting, I am not talking as the Lord would, but as a fool. Since many are boasting in the way the world does, I too will boast. You gladly put up with fools, since you are so wise. A little bit of sarcasm there. Because, they love to argue. The philosophers, they love to argue. In fact, you even put up with anyone who enslaves you, or exploits you, or takes advantage of you, or puts on airs, or slaps you in the face. To my shame, I admit that we were too weak for that. Whatever anyone else dares to boast about, I am speaking as a fool. I also dare to boast about. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I'm out of my mind to talk like this. I am more. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. In other words, as you see who I am, been there, done that, have the t-shirt. In fact, I made the t-shirt. We're not even in the same league, those false apostles. So that's the background. And I know we've exhausted a lot of time, but I think in order to close the book on 2 Corinthians, we have to see this part of the letter. Otherwise, we ended it on a high note without recognizing that Paul was having challenges. The most important point I want to make today, if I don't get around to it, is strength in weakness. Sometimes we get cut down a little bit so that God can build us up. And I think all of us have been there. Somebody has done something or said something or thought something and hurt us in some way. And we're saying, Lord, can you fix this? We want to get even. And you have what Paul calls a thorn in the flesh. In the flesh would mean in a worldly way, I guess. So his thorn in the flesh is, I think, he never says what it is. But his old self is still manifesting itself. Who I am. If people are mean to me, I want to tell them off. I have this thorn in the flesh. And he's asked God, he said, 3 times to remove the thorn in the flesh. It wasn't removed. So he says, God responded, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is perfected in your weakness. So he found a new way to glory in God. We're going to look at chapter 12. I think we have the background.
I must go on boasting. Although there is nothing to be gained, I will go on to visions and revelations from the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the 3rd heaven. Whether this was in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, but God knows, was caught up to paradise and heard inexpressible things, things that no one is permitted to tell. I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself, except about my weaknesses. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain, so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say, or because of these surpassingly great revelations. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan, to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties, for when I am weak, then I am strong.
We don't automatically delight in weaknesses or in insults. You have to go through some stuff to get to the place where you say, okay, I will delight in this. It's kind of a resignation that God is not answering the way you want, but the way he intends for your own sake. So that's where we're going to get started. Question number 2. Many scholars believe Paul is talking about himself in verses 2 through 5. Have you heard that as well? If so, why might he not have wanted to be more explicit about these ecstatic experiences, the visions and revelations that he talks about? You see in verse 1, he says, I go on boasting, although there is nothing to be gained. I will go on to visions and revelations from the Lord. And then he said, I know a man. And scholars say he's talking about himself. I've known a man 14 years ago, this is what has happened. How does Paul know that person so intimately? So many scholars say he's talking about himself. So my question was, why might Paul not have wanted to talk about himself more explicitly in this situation? I'm hoping that you see the context. There's all this boasting by others, and he is trying to be a little humble here. He goes back to boasting. But he said, I know a man, he got caught up in the third heaven. The more important part is that he's talking about visions and revelations to say, I've been there. Give me an example that you remember from Scripture where Paul had a vision. On the road to Damascus, his conversion. Been there. Okay. Revelations from the Lord. So obviously, he's saying this is part of my apostleship. I've been entitled to be an apostle. So those who criticize me, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own experiences. But he doesn't say, it is I know a man. But then at verse 5 he comes back, I will boast about a man like that. Why are you boasting about somebody else? Himself. I will not boast about myself, except about my weaknesses. I don't have enough Bible knowledge to unpackage that, but many scholars say he's talking about himself. Is there anyone else who has commentary or comment to make about that? Otherwise,
he kind of answers it in verse 6, at the end of verse 6. Because he says he refrains from boasting about these things so that no one may think more of me than he sees in me or hears from me. So he was refraining from stating it as himself so that people wouldn't look at him higher than God. He wasn't making himself a God.
Okay. Anyone else? Again, hopefully you see the context. There's all this strife going on in Corinth. He is trying to say, okay, I don't want to boast so that no one will think of me, more of me than is warranted by what I do or say. I need somebody else to help me out here. I think he's saying, judge by my actions. Don't think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say. What have I said and what have I done? You don't have to go beyond that.
I think he's saying the gospel is what is important, and the relationship with Christ is what is important, and staying true to sound doctrine is what is important. Because he doesn't want to be conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelation. So I think he's trying to keep the focus where the focus needs to be. Well, all the while he's defending himself.
Defending himself. He's saying, when you look at their resume and their credentials and mine look better than theirs. I don't want to boast, but what have they done? They are eloquent of speech. But look at my track record. All I've done. That needs to come for something. I don't want to talk about things you haven't seen, but look at what I've done. On paper, you can see that I've accomplished certain things for the kingdom. Question number 4. Paul reveals that he deals with a thorn in the flesh, and that's where we're going to focus the rest of the session. How might a thorn in the flesh be beneficial and detrimental? In Paul's life, or even in our lives?
Make us cry out to God for strength to get through it, to face it. And what was the opposite side you asked?
Beneficial and detrimental.
Oh, and detrimental could be, woe is me. Why isn't God doing this? Why isn't he answering? So one can draw you up and one can question.
Yes.
Well, when we're in discomfort, we're more likely to lean on the Lord. And so it's a reminder that he is in control. And then keeping the thorn in the flesh is to remind us of our dependence upon him.
Some think the thorn might have been a spouse.
As I said,
I don't say it facetiously, I say it because some scholars think that the thorn may have been a spouse.
yeah, and that's why I was trying to avoid.
Okay, I didn't say it. I didn't say it then.
Did you take 2 cards?
I didn't say which spouse, I just said a spouse.
Moving on. Question number 5. Verse 8. In verse 8, Paul says he pleaded with the Lord to take away his thorn. How does the Lord answer in verse 9?
Grace is sufficient for you.
And how does Paul respond after that? Verse 9, he continues. What does he say?
Gladly boast about his weakness.
Gladly boast about. And I said, we don't start out there. Because sometimes there are people who try to appear humble when they're really being arrogant by talking about their weakness. And I don't think he's doing that. He's not playing a game of the sort. He's saying, well, I asked the Lord to fix this. And the Lord chose not to. His response to me was, my grace is sufficient for you. So live with it. Deal with it. And that's hard sometimes. But then you grow to the situation and say, well, I can't change it. So I might as well, to use a not so great cliche, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Figure out how to make it work. But in this case, the Lord is saying, my grace will get you through this. My power is perfected in your weakness. And a few weeks ago we were talking about the chosen and the disciple James who had a handicap and he was thinking, Jesus heal all these people. He said, what about me? And Jesus said, okay, don't worry. We'll use this to help you to witness. Okay. Yes.
I don't know if Paul spoke with the Greek philosophy of first mentions, but it's interesting as he names the infirmities, he starts with reproaches and then moves into persecutions and then distress. It's interesting to me that if you sit back and take a deep breath when you listen to the reproach of others, you can probably learn as much about them as you can about yourself, the perspective from which they come at you, and the things that they reference, the things that they say. It often, in my view, reflects more of what and who they are than what I am.
Anyone else? I've never focused in that direction before, John. That's a good perspective for me to think about too. Thank you. Question number 7. At first glance, Paul's final statement in verse 10 seems like a contradiction. How can weaknesses make us strong?
You gotta keep working at it, whatever that it is.
Yeah.
And trusting.
When we recognize it, then we've got to work at it, making us talk to ourselves through God's Word and say, I know this is my weakness. Now, God, you gotta help me.
I need a little more chatter. Personal story may be appropriate, but weakness making you strong.
Well, again, if you went with my my theory there, and you were actually trying to minister to a friend or a group of people, the insight you get, to me, it always seems a bit more truthful when it's spoken immediately first, even in anger. And you learn you learn what's at the top of the list, and you can come back and minister, infiltrate, address, or really. I don't think Paul in this context had any doubt about himself. So what does he use about reproaches? What's the value of a reproach to this guy who was trained in such a way? And I was taken a little bit back by your thing by your expression that he wasn't eloquent in speech. Well, with all the training he had, I'll bet you there was some speech therapy or courses or something that went in his training. Yeah. So, but I mean, to learn from those reproaches and to retract and re-enter into a discussion, a ministry, or whatever, I think is, again, learning more about the people you're with than yourself at times.
Okay, I like that. I want to focus on the word strong for a minute. When I am weak, then I am strong. What is another word you might use? And maybe your translation has a different word, but what word might you put in there? In my weakness. When I am weak, then I am strong. Any other synonyms might work there? Strong may be a real contrast, but there might be another word that might work. I'm thinking, in my weakness, I can be effective. God can use me. He can take my circumstances and help them to be an example. I remember a few years ago, I taught a student who had no arms. The student drove himself to school. No arms. Wrote their tests and did well. And I'm thinking, those of us who have our limbs, we whine about a hangnail. There are people who have real situations and they're powering through. I'm not saying that we whine too much. But sometimes we do have a lot of pity parties. That if we saw other situations, we might not have these pity parties. What's that old cliche? I complained about having no shoes till I met a man with no legs. The Ellen.
Well, I think we have a choice that when something makes us weak, we can curl up in a ball, put our head in the sand, and just live there. Or else we can have hope that there's a brighter tomorrow, and so we gather whatever strength we have left and we push forward.
I quote this song more than any other song in this class. The General Booth's daughter wrote a song where she said, "Live above feeling, victory's there." If I haven't quoted that song 100 times, I haven't quoted it once. Live above feeling. Sometimes in our feelings we get whiny. She says, live above feeling. That's where the victory is.
You may not be able to control the situation, but you can usually control the response.
Our attitude, etc. Yeah. So our weaknesses can be used as strengths. And sometimes it's part of your testimony. I mean, we mentioned a few weeks ago Johnny Erickson Tada, her situation. And she continues to be an evangelist, quadriplegic, and still evangelizing. Again, some of us whine more than we should because there are people with far worse circumstances. And we need to stop complaining. I heard last Sunday General Cox or his wife talk about someone who rode a bicycle many days to come to the Congress. A week. They rode a bicycle for a week to come to the Congress. Had to go home another week. But they were just happy to be able to do that. That's all they had. The people who walk. Commissioner Roberts has talked about people who walk to church and they get there an hour after the service begins and you can't end the service because they just got there. So the people who are making an effort, and you want to be respectful of that. And some of us, again, I don't want to say quit whining, but temper our whining. recognize that we have abundance and we should be grateful. And part of that gratitude is thinking a little more of others and helping other people out too. Okay, enough of the sermonizing. We're almost done. Question number 8. He says, I delight in weaknesses and insults, in hardships and persecutions and difficulties. And John already helped us with this. But I asked the question just for completeness here. What does it mean to delight in these things? How can you delight in weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and difficulties?
From what you learn from them, right?
Okay. But it's like education is not a delight generally, right?
Well, it's an
Investment.
For you it is.
Yeah, I would think it is.
Shakespeare said, beware when all men speak well of you. In other words, if everybody's saying what a wonderful person you are, you're not making an effect.
I need another response that will cap off the session for us. How can you be delight?
To hardship, we learn him differently. When we have abundance, our needs are met, we're in good health, don't need him quite as much. Doesn't mean we neglect him. But when things are bad, when you can't pay your bills, when somebody is sick, you cling to him totally different. And when you get through that, I can say from experience, you wouldn't want to go through it again, but you wouldn't not have wanted to experience it because you know him differently.
Love that. Jill.
Oh, no, I don't know.
Oh, Julie.
So if we take the onus off trying harder or doing more to get over this, like there's a slogan in the recovery community, let go, let God, you know. I'm come to the end of myself here, you know, it's God now. So then I can delight in my weaknesses because God can shine through my weaknesses. It's not me now, it's about God.
That's right.
I brought the mic. Yes.
Well, it can increase your faith if you lean on God. And he, like he said, my grace is sufficient for you. And the weaker you become, the stronger God is in your mind. And that increases your faith.
There was a song by Annie Johnson Flint. He giveth more grace as our burdens grow greater. He sendeth more strength as our labors increase. To added affliction, he added his mercy. To multiply trials, he multiplies peace. Out of his infinite riches, he giveth and giveth and giveth again. Somebody else. Response? Okay, let's move on. We're almost done. We may actually be able to cover all of our content. Question number 9, it says, can you personally relate to having a thorn in the flesh? And if so, how have you seen God use it in some way for the sake of your character and your witness? God used your thorn in the flesh. Any? I can't believe in a group of 25 people there's no one who...
Well, I remember a very impactful sermon given by Herb Fuqua at John McClane's funeral. They were both Vietnam vets. And the line that I remember, I don't remember anything else about the sermon except that it had a very strong impact. And Herb said, in the manner that only Herb can say it, Christians should die differently. And John died differently. Had to do with the witness, the confidence, the peace for the transition that was about to take place, and according to his testimony, John was a witness on his way out of those sorts of things. And John's been gone a long time, so those of us who knew John knew that he was not without his faults, but his faith, his confession in Christ was strong.
Okay, I'm not going to hold you much longer. Last question. How have you proven God's grace to be sufficient? How have you proven God's grace to be sufficient?
We're all here.
okay, I did not. So let me just read my last song and then we'll wrap it up. Again, we are trying to understand the context for why Paul wrote like this. He is obviously hurt. He is upset. I want to say he's angry because the work you've worked hard at, other people are undermining you and taking credit, and you're not getting a sense of joy about this. But God has said, it's okay. Remember how Paul died. So, you don't go gloriously. The last 4 years of his life, he's in prison. Then he's executed. So, it doesn't end like, okay, he's done all this great stuff. Anyway, here's the last song I'm going to quote, number 804. The first verse says, how firm a foundation the saints of the Lord is laid for your faith in this excellent word. I quote verse 2. Fear not, I am with thee. O be not dismayed, for I am thy God, I will still give thee aid. I will strengthen thee, help thee, and cause thee to stand, upheld by my gracious, omnipotent hand. When through the deep waters I call thee to go, the rivers of grief shall not thee overflow. For I will be with thee, thy trials to bless, and sanctify to thee thy deepest distress. Last verse. When through fiery trials thy pathway shall lie, my grace all sufficient shall be thy supply. The flames shall not hurt thee. I only design thy dross to consume and thy gold to refine. Now the flames are designed to burn off the dross and refine you as gold. The hardship comes for a reason. And while we are not happy to endure it, the endurance makes us a better person. And God certainly gets the glory. It's a tough lesson. It's a tough lesson because you would expect that when you serve the Lord faithfully, that things should work well. And here's Paul saying, it doesn't necessarily go that way. But I learned that God's grace is sufficient. And His power is perfected in my weakness. Let us learn to glory in these situations, as hard as it is. Let's pray.